Welcome in, everyone. I'm Representative Brian Brown, and this is the very first episode of the Carolina 9 podcast. As you can tell, the Carolina 9 podcast will be both an audio and video podcast, allowing you to enjoy the show anywhere you choose. So what in the world is the Carolina 9 podcast anyway? The Carolina 9 podcast will focus on issues facing our state. This podcast will hopefully serve as a lighthearted venue for you to get to know me a little bit better as your representative, as well as the community leaders that make this state such a great place to live. Now, this first episode will be quite a bit different from any future episodes. In this episode, we are going to cover the exciting news the mainstream media refuses to cover. I will walk you through where our state started prior to Republican control and where we are today. Then in future episodes, we will have different segments focusing on topics like my family, my faith, interviews with state and local leaders, even viewer comments, and what will no doubt become a fan favorite, the Who Hates Me the Most This Week in the Daily Reflector Award. So without any further ado, let's get going. The Republicans in the 2012 election stood before voters and promised change. We promised jobs, a balanced budget, education reform, regulatory reform, putting a stop to Obamacare, standing behind our military, and reforming our state's outdated tax code. We all found ourselves getting behind then-candidate Governor Pat McCrory's message of a Carolina comeback, and a Carolina comeback is what has begun. This past year and a half has been filled with some really powerful policy changes in our state. From tax reform to voter ID, this conservative legislative body is finally moving North Carolina in the right direction. Republicans this past session balanced the state budget, cut burdensome regulations for our small businesses, provided pay raises for every North Carolina teacher, and honored our military veterans by passing education credits for training they received while on active duty. Now, if you're like me, you're bound to ask the question, are the policy changes that have been made by this Republican legislature working? And the answer is a resounding yes. When Republicans came into power in 2013, North Carolina had the fifth highest unemployment rate in the country. The bottom line was that our businesses were too scared to hire, putting our neighbors out of work. Right here in Pitt County, at the start of my term in January 2013, we had an unemployment rate that was just above 10%. And I'm proud to say that in December of 2013, just 1 year from taking office, Pitt County's unemployment rate was under 7%, where it still remains today. These drastic drops in unemployment has led to North Carolina being recognized for having the fastest drop in unemployment in the entire country. In fact, as of today, 15% of all jobs created in the United States are created right here in North Carolina. So what are some of those jobs that we're seeing relocate or expand here in North Carolina? It's jobs like Enviva Biomass, where they created 160 jobs and made a $214 million investment. Or Ideal Fastener Corporation, who created 155 jobs and made a $5.7 million investment. How about United Furniture Industries? 200 jobs and a $5.2 million investment. Sealed Air Corporation, over 1,200 jobs and a $58 million investment right here in North Carolina. These companies, along with so many others, have helped North Carolina create over 70,000 new jobs in this last calendar year, a tremendous feat for a state who just 1 year ago had the fifth highest unemployment rate in the country. As we campaigned, we talked about jobs in our economy. One of our main focus was to become more competitive in the southeastern region and to emerge as the regional leader in job growth. So how have we done? Well, the facts are we're doing great. Not a single neighboring state has seen the job growth and unemployment reductions North Carolina has seen. While our neighbors are losing jobs, North Carolina is open for business and growing. In fact, we are seeing the lowest unemployment numbers our state has seen in over 8 years. But don't just take my word for it. Even major media outlets like the Raleigh News and Observer, Winston-Salem Journal, and the Charlotte Business Journal have all reported on the sharp decline in unemployment. With all of this job creation, North Carolina has been recognized in the #2 spot for the most created jobs in the nation. North Carolina has been credited as the number 3 state for tech sector job growth. The tech sector is one that we are very, very excited about here in North Carolina. These jobs are often highly skilled and pay higher than average wages, and the tech sector is looking for states who have a workforce-ready environment to fill their needs. And thanks to our outstanding community college system and nationally recognized university system, we're the state to fill those needs. After a lot of work, we are also very proud to say that North Carolina is the 4th best state for business in the country, a distinction that is prompting companies of all sizes to look towards the pirate state, the Tar Heel state. North Carolina is also ranked 6th nationally for economic competitiveness, which is a direct result of all the current legislation efforts to reform our outdated tax code. As someone in the hospitality industry, a statistic that I love to see is our state's ranking as the 6th most visited state in the country. From our beautiful beaches right here in the east to our towering mountains in the west, visitors from all over the country are calling North Carolina their vacation home and bringing billions of dollars with them to our state. You know, the news headlines, they're filled with government, with out-of-control spending. But right here at home, well, we're different. Under Republican leadership, we were able to get our fiscal house in order and not only rein in government spending, but also manage to keep our valuable AAA credit rating. In fact, North Carolina is one of only 10 states to have maintained their AAA credit rating. Republican legislators also kept a campaign promise to right the wrongs inflicted on our education system by our Democratic colleagues over the past few sessions. No longer will our teachers face a frozen pay scale or furloughs. Instead, North Carolina teachers will have received one of the largest pay increases in our state's history. As a state, we're also all very concerned for the future of our education system, particularly in attracting and retaining new teachers. The majority of the state's school-age population resides in the urban crest of North Carolina, in counties like Wake and Mecklenburg. These counties also have the highest percentage of teachers with less than 5 years of experience in the classroom. Now, you may hear that these teachers are leaving North Carolina to take positions in other states. And although there could be a handful of teachers leaving for other states, for the majority of teachers, that is simply not true. You see, our public school system is not competing with Texas or Tennessee. Our public school system is competing with the private sector. Would-be teachers are seeing the potential earnings in working for a private organization or even a nonprofit versus starting their careers oftentimes thousands of dollars below these private sector jobs by becoming or remaining a teacher. Realizing the importance of attracting and retaining educators, our Republican legislature increased starting teacher pay by 14%, making us much more competitive than in the past. One of the biggest complaints we received from our business community was the amount of red tape in the state government. The facts are, North Carolina was far from a customer-friendly state. This division didn't talk to that division, causing duplications and waste. Governor McCrory and the Republican legislature made sweeping reforms within state government. We focused on customer service while removing the duplications and removing the waste. The efforts still continue, but the early results are looking very promising for the average North Carolinian. We also sought to reform our regulatory code. North Carolina had become the regulation state, a state that passed regulations without right-correcting or doing away with previous versions. This layering of regulations created uncertainty and confusion for our business community. We have made tremendous strides in reforming our regulatory environment in the last 2 years. Most notably, placing a sunset provision on all regulations and that they will be reviewed, changed, or allowed to expire every 10 years. You know, I still remember my stump speech from 2012. Highest gas tax in the Southeast. Highest corporate income tax in the Southeast. Highest personal income tax in the Southeast. An outdated and antiquated tax structure. Well, that's no longer the case. Your Republican legislature stepped in and reformed our failing system. We eliminated the three-tier tax bracket system and placed all North Carolinians on a flat, fair 5.8% rate this year and a 5.75% rate next year. The most vulnerable North Carolinians will retain an effective 0% personal income tax rate. We also increased the standard deduction to $15,000 for married families filing jointly, $12,000 for head of households, and $7,500 for a single filer. We increased the child credit from $100 to $125 per dependent for families making $40,000 or less, and we protected our senior citizens and families by keeping the existing exemptions for Social Security as well as the mortgage interest deduction. For our businesses, we reduced the corporate income tax rate from 6.9% to 6% this year and further down to 5% next year, giving North Carolina the second lowest corporate income tax rate in the Southeast. And we kept exemptions from state sales tax for food and medicine to ensure they are affordable for all citizens. Many North Carolinians forget that our Democratic colleagues didn't just freeze teacher pay. They also froze state employee pay. Most notably are men and women in the Highway Patrol who risk their lives each and every day to keep us safe. I am proud to say that your Republican legislature also righted this wrong, and our state troopers will see an average of a 6% pay raise, their first pay raise since 2009. It was also extremely important for this General Assembly to look after our beloved military installations and the dedicated soldiers who are based right here within those gates in our state. We fought to protect Cherry Point and Seymour Johnson from being harmed by the presence of wind farms located within their training areas. We also took a major step towards assisting our returning veterans by allowing them to receive college credit for training they received while on active duty. It's the very least we can do for these brave soldiers. You asked for it, and we delivered. Although maybe not as quick as some of you may have wanted, but I am proud to say that North Carolina, led by your elected conservatives, passed comprehensive election law reform that will protect the integrity of your future vote. Republicans this past session took further steps in the fight for life by strengthening our pro-life stance. We fought to pass legislation that provides more stringent oversight for abortion clinics, and we took a stand and passed a woman's right to know legislation. All very positive steps towards protecting our state's unborn. We also said no to Obamacare and Medicaid expansion, not because we want to deny coverage, but because North Carolina has a broken Medicaid system, a system that has zero predictability and is not based in long-term outcomes for the very patients that it's meant to serve. Now you might say, but the federal government was going to pay 100% of the cost for 3 years, and you would be correct, but at what cost to this state? And once we move into year 4 and the state of North Carolina is on the hook for 10%, well, 10% today, the federal government has never been much for keeping promises. Where do we get that additional money? You see, North Carolina has been forced to reduce reimbursements to physicians and hospitals to record lows. So low, in fact, 40% of our state's private practices are no longer accepting new Medicaid patients. And even with this reduction in payments, our state was still facing millions of dollars in overruns each and every fiscal year. In fact, Medicaid in North Carolina has grown from $7 billion to over $14 billion in just the last 10 years. That's growth that no state can keep up with. And what about the outcomes? Statistics show us that our state's Medicaid population is simply not becoming healthier. The question is why? Well, let's look at it. Take a Medicaid patient with a mental health diagnosis who is hospitalized, one of the most costly Medicaid patients we see. And only 17% of these patients are utilizing the Medicaid coverage to seek follow-up care with a primary care provider once they've been released from the hospital. So where do they end up? You guessed it, right back where they started, the ED, and the cycle begins again. So how do we reform a system that relies on enrollment growth for funding and does not focus on outcomes? This will be the biggest question our next General Assembly will face. Medicaid expansion is not dead. However, the old way of managing Medicaid is. So we continue to hear from the far left that we are destroying the state. We see marches on the steps of the Capitol and angry hate letters in the newspaper. What does the Moral Monday crowd desire for our state anyway? $7 billion. The president of the Senate, Senator Phil Berger, he sat down with the Moral Monday leaders and asked them to lay out their agenda. And he would look at it in terms of feasibility. This agenda was then delivered to our nonpartisan fiscal research team in the General Assembly to calculate the cost to the taxpayers. And that cost was a whopping $7 billion. $7 billion added to the state budget that's just a little over $20 billion currently. $7 billion in additional taxes that can only be paid for by raising the corporate income tax rate over 50%. This is the very reason why our country continues out of control debt by leadership under President Obama and Senator Kay Hagan, and why we must elect Thom Tillis to the U.S. Senate to fight to send our country in a different direction. On that note, how does the leadership of Thom Tillis and the Republican leaders like myself compare to the leadership of President Obama and the Hagan D.C. crowd? Well, the United States has a $500 billion deficit, and North Carolina has a balanced budget. There are a record number of Americans still unemployed, while North Carolina has seen the largest drop in unemployment in the nation. And most importantly, America's credit rating has been downgraded for the first time in history, while North Carolina remains number 1 out of 10 states with a AAA credit rating. The results speak for themselves. What can you do to help? First and foremost, pray for our leaders. Pray for those who seek public office on both sides of the aisle. It's simply not an easy task. Get involved. Volunteer to knock on doors, make phone calls, work the polls on election day, or even host a meet and greet in your house. Of course, elections cost money, lots of money. As Republicans, we must get our message out in the community. We can simply not rely on the media to assist us. Unfortunately, that costs money. Did I mention lots of money? Please consider donating. It doesn't have to be much money. Every dollar makes an enormous difference in my ability to share the positive message you heard here today. If you would like to get involved in my campaign, or if you would like to make a donation, please visit my website at votebrianbrown.com or find me on Facebook at facebook.com/votebrianbrown. Finally, you can follow me on Twitter. Just search for Representative Brian Brown. I hope you enjoyed today's show and found it to be informative. Please share this message with others and be on the lookout for future episodes of the Carolina 9 podcast. Until then, keep fighting the good fight and stay blessed, North Carolina.